I'll start by saying thank you, Kyle, for joining me for a little podcast and doing a little interview. There's not, what should I say? There's a lot going on at the moment in the cannabis realm, not a whole lot of clarity, not a whole lot of coherence, perhaps. And so I wanted to speak with Kyle, who is incredibly knowledgeable, has a background in music and has been a musician for many years, but has found himself in the world of cannabis, and we'll delve into a bit of that journey and that transition. But I've asked Kyle to come and join us basically to sort of help, I guess, discuss some of the current events that are impacting the cannabis industry and the cannabis ecosystem at the moment, but also just learn who Kyle is, what's going on in Scotland as well, our brothers up to the north, and hopefully we can piece some of that together, Kyle. So I don't know if you want to give a little introduction as to who you are, what you're about, and we'll pick into some of that in the next, well, yeah, with a few little questions. But over to you, Kyle. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much, Chris. Great to be here with you on the podcast. Thanks for having me on. It's always great to chat in this space here. So yeah, my name's Kyle Esplin. I've been involved in the industry. It's coming up close to a decade. I'm chair of the Scottish Hemp Association, which is coming up nearly 2 years or so. We've had that. I'm also a director of Holistic Highland Hemp, CBD company up here in Scotland. Been doing for some time, but I came into the space back in 2013 after my own journey with a health experience, being knocked out of action from a post-viral fatigue syndrome, and that brought me into the world of CBD and health and the cannabis industry. So it's a bit of a journey across the last decade, but here we are now.
So as you've been a patient yourself slightly, Kyle, before going through that transition, I suppose, you were in the music industry. Not to go too much into cannabis and music, but how did you hear about cannabis and how did you get searching about cannabis, and why did you think that it could maybe help with your condition as well, Kyle?
Okay, so why cannabis specifically was I was being put through every department in the medical system, and as the options were getting narrower of what the diagnosis could be, and everything was adding up in line to looking like being diagnosed with a post-viral fatigue syndrome, which is an alternative name for ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis. And the prognosis is concerning when it goes on for some time. It can be a lifelong debilitating condition, which can range from either mild fatigue or completely bedbound and unable to look after yourself type of thing. So when I realized that was the type of trajectory my health was on, and I was unable to look after myself, and my small bursts of energy I used all of that just to try and research, because when you went to the doctor, there would be, let's look at one symptom or one new test to be done. So that's on the schedule for 3-4 weeks ahead. That gets done and there's results, and there's nothing to be answered from that. Okay, next thing to look at. That's now like 2 months or so has passed, and this sort of process goes on. So I had been just looking through all sorts of health stories, research, and it came from two angles. One, I'd heard about the Rick Simpson story, the original documentary that Rick put up there, this story from Canada. And then I heard about other conditions, a wide range of seemingly unconnected conditions being helped, or claims of it being helped. I was aware a similar type of extract was used, over 100 years ago, and until the 70s it was used in our hospitals here, but let's say back in the 1800s it had more attention to it. And then in the research, the line that really stood out to me when I was in the PubMed database browsing through things was how I came to learn of the endocannabinoid receptor system, and I asked my GP about this, and the GP hadn't even heard of it. So I was like, well, okay, my GP is operating within a limited framework here. The word medicine has been sort of hijacked the field recently in some sorts as to what can't be called medicine, and the tight framework of what makes the definition of medicine. So my GP wasn't aware of cannabinoid receptor signaling. And when I learned that its main purpose was to maintain homeostasis, you know, the overall purpose was the control of all the systems. And the problem I was suffering from is really like a long list of every symptom you could imagine, you know, and it was like something's wrong with just a complete dysfunction across the board, from the nervous system to the immune system. And that's everything from temperature regulation to sensory perception to energy regulation to, you know, metabolizing, processing food. Just everything was out of action. And I was aware that like I've got this long list of, just a huge list of dysfunction, you know. This is like this is not within the range of expectations that there's going to be some magic medicine turns up that pulls all of this back into line. You know, that is not on the expectations of my horizon. And looking into people who've been suffering for 10, 15, 30 years with it, that's also not their experience. But as time goes on, the list of medications gets bigger and longer. And then, of course, they're concerned to change or stop because they've been told to be taking medicine. And I could see this was a trajectory. That option was always going to be open to me, provided this didn't do something seriously wrong and put myself so out of action before coming back to that as a backup plan. But I really saw that despite all the discomfort and all the symptoms of, you know, sleeplessness, no energy, extreme pain, sensory dysfunction, inflammation, immune system problem, just everything out of line, I was like, there's no point in just throwing in tablets for this, because it's only going to add to this situation. So that's how I saw the starting point of the way forward, and where cannabis fit into that story of to maintain and return homeostasis. And I could not find a better single description to explain what was wrong with me, apart from a long list of every symptoms you could imagine.
Everything was out of stasis, basically. And
yeah,
it's interesting that, well, that story you've just described there, Cal's quite, I guess, common across the spectrum of patient stories, if you know what I mean. A bit of disillusionment with the current medical system, and I've tried everything. My options are pretty limited, and it's being looked at symptom by symptom rather than necessarily, again, slightly holistically. And I hate to use that word holistic, but you have to look at the big picture at some point. And so it's interesting that I guess that transition then into researching for yourself seems to be the path that a lot of people go down once they've sort of exhausted the NHS route. What was that process of researching your illness like, Kyle? Because I speak to a lot of patients that, well, don't necessarily have the skills to go and be able to research PubMed and all of the medical literature out there and sort of assess it themselves. What was that process like for you?
So it was a new territory. I had a lot to learn of where I was diving into and terminology and things. And I see that I really see actually of patient groups that the post-viral fatigue syndrome and ME group, and to varying degrees how the long COVID is in the post-viral fatigue to different degrees, that it's a very sort of difficult patient group really to have a community and to get through to and things, because the people are in the worst case who are literally like just hanging on, and all the energy they have is not enough to look after themselves as it is, you know, and they already can't cope with what there is, and they already can't deal with the sensory stimulation input of what there is to deal with, never mind trying to forge some new path. But I saw that, like I was, let's say, most scared of that type of situation of becoming what I'd feel kind of trapped, to then feeling, you know, a closing circle of options to get out of, you know. And the whole thing, like the road people go down, and so many people have that story that, oh yeah, I tried the antidepressants or different things that weren't appropriate and had all these experiences. Like it was predictable. That's all the doctor was going to say. And if I'd went down that route, it's predictable what was going to happen. Like there's plenty, there is not documented stories of, oh, that worked out all great. It's like, so I'd asked some of the patient groups. So after all my options were exhausted after 6 months, diagnosed post-viral fatigue syndrome, and the immune system problems, extreme sleep problems, despite the fatigue and things, the doctor said, maybe you want to take these tablets, these antidepressants. Says, I'm not depressed. No, but they can be used off-label to help reduce the inflammation and help you to sleep. And I said, oh, could I just take them on occasion to sleep then? No, you have to take them for like 2 weeks before they start working. All right, so just change the inner working of my chemicals for the chance I might get some more sleep with this. And while I'm feeling for the first time in my life, I don't recognize the metabolism I'm living with anymore. I've never felt the need to try and say something like that before, but I do not recognize the inner workings of the system I now sort of inhabit since this trouble and dysfunction has kicked off. And there's no evidence that's going to help. And like I asked some patient groups, what's your experience been with these tablets? How have they helped? Have you had any side effects? And literally the answer was, it's hard to tell what's the side effects and what's the ongoing symptoms of the condition. I'm like, well, that's really helping. Just put that in there. I'm not really sure if it's helping or not, but that's not the type of help I'm looking for. I'd rather just suffer along, to be honest, and have that on my mind that I am now contributing possibly to the dysfunction that my system is going through. So the doctor offered antidepressants, and I said, I don't think that's an appropriate medication. And the doctor's like, well, sorry, like I don't have anything else. I'm like, yeah, I'm aware of that. I'm aware there is no recognized treatment for that. But like, I saw this as not just, oh, well, I'll just try that and see how it goes. I specifically said to the doctor, will there be side effects? For example, gaining weight. Is it likely I could gain weight from this as a side effect? And the doctor said, that is a common side effect. And that's where I was saying, well, I'm already struggling with this new metabolism I'm living with. I don't see how that's going to be helpful in the long run. And are they high in calories? And the doctor said, well, I asked the doctor, could you explain to me, why am I going to gain weight if they're not high in calories? What is the mechanism of action? The doctor didn't have the answer. Well, I've since found out the typical mechanism of action is it causes dysbiosis in the gut, promotes the growth of bad bacteria while not helping the good ones. And that's the mechanism of action behind a lot of weight gain with antidepressants. I was like, right, well, this gut disturbance is known in this condition as it is, and I'm feeling it as it is. I just don't see I'm going to be getting back to normal throwing any of these things in. So that was the point where I saw that me and the doctor were going separate ways. It was a fork in the road, and there's no guarantee anyways, except I saw the trajectory of becoming stuck in the situation. And as well, the people over time, it starts with that one tablet, and after years, I saw some people who've been like 20 years the condition, now they're on like 15 tablets. And I'm thinking, like, you would need to be really healthy to start with to take all those drugs and remain healthy. Like, really, this seems to be where we're at. So at that point, this was now into 2013. Well, it's the end of the trouble happened to me in summer of 2012. By the end of 2012, I'd seen some of the research in this line. And then it was in February 13 where I was diagnosed and all conditions, all options exhausted. So from then on, I was trying to figure out some safe options into the cannabis therapeutic space. And I had a whole new bunch of like intolerances and hypersensitivities and allergies in this. Like, I wasn't just up for just randomly trying something and that'll be fine, extract that, or you don't know what that's been made from, etc. Like, I wasn't in that condition where that was a viable or an option or sensible way forward for me. And so I've been looking into hearing the stories coming out from Colorado, Charlotte's Web, and all these type of stories. And then I tracked down Werner Bruning in Holland. Now, Werner, he opened the first clinic in Holland of assisting patients, both with THC and CBD oils. he was the first I could track down who was supplying CBD extract from European hemp at the time. And Werner, back in the day, he started the first coffee shop in Holland, the Mellow Yellow. That was Werner's. Then he started Positronics. So he's been like on the leading edge of all different things in the space. And he's running this clinic in Haarlem, just outside Amsterdam, 15 minutes on the train. But actually, Amsterdam supposedly wasn't up for hosting the the therapeutic setting, but Haarlem and the neighbouring territory was. So I went there and saw a doctor there at Werner's clinic and got a couple different full spectrum oils, and within a few days it was like it turned down the volume of the symptoms, and I could tell that internally the sort of changes it made, it just felt like it was giving me a more level playing field to be able to try and regain strength and rebalance and recover. That's what it felt like. It was like turning down volume on the signals over it. Just it was like a rebalancing of sorts, and I'd lost so much strength and everything over time, but finally my system was going in the direction of where it could have some progress. Because the hallmark symptom of post-viral fatigue syndrome and ME, which it's hard to really comprehend until either it happens to you or it happens to a loved one you know and you see it. It's called post-exertional malaise, and it's like the setbacks after doing something, and it's hugely disproportionate. Setback is so disproportionate to what you've done. You know, it's like you could go for, you know, let's say you're feeling up to walking for 2 minutes outside, and this feels like the extent, and then you think, no, I'll just keep going. I feel like I should stop, but I'll just keep going for 2 minutes more. And then after that 2 minutes, you all of a sudden collapse, and it's literally like 2 weeks in bed until you're walking again for 2 minutes. But if you hadn't done that extra 2 minutes, you might have been okay to walk the 2 minutes again the next day, but you went over the line, and the setback is just so hard a reaction from the immune system, it seems. So that's the thing that differs it from just fatigue, tiredness. It's these massive crashes. And then the way I explain it as well, it's like a battery that doesn't charge properly and then discharges rapidly, you know. So it's like if you went to sleep, or like with your phone, you wake up and look at the phone, it's only got 4% power, and that's it for the day, and that's it, it dies, and that's it. We have to wait till the next day to see if you have any power or not, you know. Right. That's how functioning was, you know.
Good grief, Kyle.
And I never expected to get back to the level of functionality I have now. I did not. I was hoping I would get back to some sort of being able to look after myself and do something. But like, you know, and that's the other thing. Like the brain fog is just ridiculous. Like that's the other thing in the community of the post-viral patients, and it's that the brain fog is like, it literally is. It's almost like you see a word coming, and then you can, like, a few seconds later you process a word. When things slow down, you can like look at words on paper and just take half a minute to read what it says. So especially, let's say in 2013, before more was spoken about in the mainstream about medical cannabis, there was very much the opinion in the medical groups, you know, that I'm suffering from extreme brain fog, you know. Once before in a party I got stoned, you know. I don't see how that's going to help me now. That was literally the type of conversation, you know. But turning down the what seems to be the inflammatory immune response or whatever completely changes that. And like you know, I feel extremely mentally sharp and keep well. The one little thing that still never totally sort of fixed is the sleep issue. I've been sort of permanently disrupted to shorter sleeps than ideal, but I get enough sleep to function. But there was just a massive sort of disturbance. Like in my previous life, I knew jet lag and international travel and late nights and things, but this level of sleep disturbance is a whole new level of dysfunction. So now it's at the point where I get enough sleep to be well and function, but sort of just could do it a wee bit more. But
So at that time, Kyle, were you also having to travel to Haarlem to visit that prescription provider and bring that back too, or were they posting that to you as well?
Well, so this was this early period was I went over and I would stay for a week or two as I could find a way to do, and consume some other full spectrum oil varieties, fill up while over there, and generally was coming back with sort of like 20-30 bottles of full spectrum CBD in the suitcase, and doing that every three to 4 months or so was pretty much what was going on there. And on the dosing as well, you know, I wasn't going by just sort of taking 2-3 drops a day. Like, I'd been in the PubMed literature to make my assessments and make my own decisions, which I never sort of talk about in the context of any guidance, but I'll explain to you here how I made my assessment to make the decision. So, you know, let's say this is 2013 context as well of what there was known about in the research, and there was tremendous amount known at the time. If you look up whether this was in mice, cells, humans, typically it was using purified cannabinoids, whether that was CBD or THC. And then typically the ranges were often from sort of 1 to 10 milligram per kilogram of body weight per day was the rough, you know, look at a lot of them, and a lot of the studies in mice, a lot of them with CBD or things would say 5 milligram per kilogram body weight per day or so, seemed to be some sort of active range. Now, I took into consideration the wide divergent range of data points, which included things like comparative trials, which are not a side-by-side clinical study, but a comparative analysis of the data of certain conditions where people were taking either isolated CBD or taking a full spectrum CBD dominant plant extract. And the ones taking the full spectrum CBD dominant plant extract were only taking around 20%, you know, 1/5 of the CBD milligram equivalent. So I factored in that, okay, you know, 5 milligram per kilogram body weight is, on various studies in mice and things, saying what looks like a useful range. And then it's maybe around 5 times more effective for whole plant. Okay, maybe that 1 milligram kilogram body weight, let's say that's the possible starting point, which for a 70 kilogram adult, that would now be the FSA's limit as a food supplement, funny enough. So at 70 milligram per day intake. So yeah, I typically for several months was initially it was probably kind of at least 200 milligrams of cannabinoids per day for several months, and then down to maybe sort of 100 milligrams per day type thing as a maintenance, as a rough outline of what I'd been up to. We're going to source the oils at the time, and it was, yeah, you know, at the time these were some of the first sort of extracts from hemp, and they were like the supercritical gold type full spectrum CO2 extracts, so with a bit more refinement than the heavy waxy angle that can be. Yeah. But I remember the picture, so with Werner Bruning, and this was in Noel van Schaik's coffee shop in Haarlem, which was next door under the clinic with the doctor where they were operating from. And the first time we had met Werner, and Noel was there, and Werner was holding up this bottle of the unlabeled gold oil, holding it in there, and he was saying, Kyle, 5 years from now, the whole world will be talking about this. So that was 2013, you know. He's been a visionary in the space. He's totally been right. He's Werner, yeah, he seems to have sort of stayed mainly in the Dutch scene. I think he's out in Spain as well, but he's a well-known character in the Dutch scene. So,
would I be right in thinking that's the clinic that a lot of the parents of the children with epilepsy were flying out to as well, and having to go and source their medicines from?
So there's been new ones since then, I think. So Werner's was the only at that time, and now there's now there's some others expanded, I believe. And actually, I think Werner's had expanded to less working with international and more with the Dutch scene of what he was up to with his distribution, I think, pretty much. But yeah, more that was only one at the time, but more variations of dispensing options became available in Holland since then.
since you've now, I guess, been through that process, Kyle, and things have progressed now in the UK, do you, I guess, how do you rate the current medical cannabis system that we've got at the moment, and how well do you think it's doing for patients? I've got a rather not pessimistic view, but a rather, what would I say, Kyle? How would we describe it? Conservative view, perhaps, of the medical cannabis system and how it's how and what it's delivering at the moment. But how's that been for you, Kyle?
Good question, something to work with here. So this is some of the let's see, the experience with the medical system. So it's getting into gear. Where we're at just now, it's getting into gear. It's early days. It feels like it's been, but it's not just early days. We've been into it for a few years, over 3 years it's been now. I think a slower rollout than everyone expected, even for expecting a slow rollout, definitely slower than everyone in the space, I think, expected. Let's see. So I think one of the big problems just now, and it's slightly sort of compounding situation, perhaps, or is a bit sort of keeping it going in a circle, is the supply chains changing, batches changing for patients, products not being available, having to change to another medication, just start a new one, and then it's not available again the next month. Because doctors can only write 1 month at a time as well for the prescriptions, or be dispensed 1 month at a time. So it's not going to be guaranteed kept in stock, you know. So if 28 days and someone has to change, and then another one's out of stock and delayed, and they're waiting and without, and then onto a different one, that's not yet solving the problem. Let's say it's but it's definitely getting there. And so what's missing, or what could be improved? And I think we're all aware of the whole not taking consideration of the terpenes, you know. And it's such an awkward thing to sort of summarize a deal with, to find solutions, or how the doctors can as well really know how to work with this and comprehend the whole situation. So, you know, for even a lot of the doctors who wanted to get into this space are finding it difficult sort of to operate in with these changing batches or things like this, or patients telling the doctor they're not getting what they want. The doctor's aware they don't have perhaps what's available to supply. And then let's say the other medical professionals who are not yet on board with, are not supportive of cannabis, if they're looking in, and this is the way it sort of is, they're not eager to dive in and get on with it, because they're also not hearing from the patient angle as well that this has solved all of the problems. You know, they were hearing from patients about how good medical cannabis could be for them, but their experience of trying to get in everything so far, that's not the conclusion. All of them are saying that that's yet solved the issue. So I remember back before, just when the medical space was starting or opening up, and being around in CBD and hemp industry, just generally being around these conversations of how this was developing, and talking to some companies who were setting up early on. And, you know, specifically remember one, you know, of a guy setting up a company in the UK to saying, oh, great, you're a patient, you know, you've experienced this, I've heard you got experience that, great. So what's your, so therapeutically, so what's your preferred ratio then? I was like, wow, I've never been asked that before. What's my preferred ratio? This is the first time in the space somebody's sort of used that terminology, let's say, you know. And patients' experience prior was never based on, there's no history of based on ratios of isolates judging how a patient had their experience, you know. And so there's a slight, there was some disconnect of some of the people and the producers and suppliers from all angles that would jump into the space. And it's just a whole variety that I guess will settle down in time. But things like the terpenes, so one of the issues is they can't really list terpenes as active medical ingredients, because the terpenes are not recognized as individually medical active ingredients by the European Pharmacopoeia. And for them to be listed in the European Pharmacopoeia, they would need to be all tried and tested and trialed one at a time. And then they would have their active range. And then when they're in cannabis, they'd be below the active range when they were singled out to have some therapeutic effect. So it's like, that's just more lost time looking in that direction. We need to really just plug in large sort of, observational real life type studies into this equation and narrow down our understanding and how people can feed back. But this is the problem, there's no point a doctor writing down feedback of a product that's only based on a THC CBD ratio, which may or may not be accurate to what's in the product. And the patient says it did this effect and may or may not be anything to do with the THC CBD component. So that's a big problem. And another thing I'd like to give a mention to specifically in this space, that a couple angles, like same as when it comes to the future of CBD production, perhaps, but like with medical implants and all this, let's say this kind of relates, the conversation starts in the CBD space, but this is applicable across the board. The idea of, plants can't just be grown outside in the fields to be used whatever, because here's a long list of reasons as to why that's a problem, why that's not going to work, and they've got to be indoor under these controlled and fed synthetic nutrients under timed lights, etc., whatever. And here's the list of reasons as to why that has to be. But cannabis has been used for thousands of years, of course. They'll also say, grown outside as plants in a field, but now there's a long list of reasons as to why that doesn't work, supposedly. But we're going to refer back to the thousands of years of history. So I would say this: the cannabis-based medicines that we have today are not the cannabis extract medicine your grandparents had access to until the 1970s in the hospitals in the UK. And I can specifically give a mention to something, and this is one thing that's completely overlooked, and it's a huge missing piece of the story. So I and some others have a slight issue of the way the CBD context gets thrown into the cannabis space. One, the terminology of skunk being a problem and not explaining anything, that being a problem. The other one, given the impression that hash always has some balanced ratios of CBD and it's traditional, whereas actually in recent years it's tripled in concentration in Europe, whereas herbal material hasn't tripled in the recent years in Europe. And then back in history, that's not the situation. The only reason we've got this sort of documented lots of stuff had balanced rates with CBD is because Britain imported a lot of cheap hash from Morocco, which was grown outside. And the Beldia keef plant that grows up there, the Beldia variety, that's like a sort of a fast flowering, they think it's somewhere like between a European landrace and a hemp type variety. It's a low concentration, it's only like 4% cannabinoids or so, those traditional Moroccan varieties, and there was more CBD. But that's not representative of the rest of the world, of everywhere else. That's one European landrace cross that's grown in that area of what's going on. So here's the thing that's missing from the conversation. And this analysis illustrations to show this on the wild type plants. I'll send you through this. So what has changed more in cannabis varieties of today is not only the THC CBD ratio. The biggest thing that has changed consistently across all the varieties is we now have significantly less ratios of the propyl homolog cannabinoids to the main ones, the CBDV, THCV. See, if you look to the wild type populations in the Himalayas, the indica subspecies Kaffir stanica or variety Himalayensis, which is known to be the ancestral source of what man then selectively bred. And in those varieties, they are THC dominant. There will be some CBD dominant plants, but on a whole, THC is typically dominant. But the one thing that is consistent is higher ratios of THCV and CBDV. So if the plant was let's say it was 6% THC, it probably had 2% THCV.
Yeah.
That was a pretty common sort of 3-to-1 ratio. And you can see this in the analysis of the wild type. And then we've got plenty of studies showing that THCV is also antipsychotic and other various things balancing against, etc. And this is completely overlooked in the discussion of something that's changed. And here's another interesting point. So this actually ties back to the medical. We're saying this is not the cannabis extract medicine that your grandparents had access to, that until 1974, cannabis extract into a tincture was available to be used in hospitals in the UK by nurses. We have Professor Roger Pertwee in Aberdeen, who was involved in the early days of the discovery of cannabinoid signaling and the ligands and the receptor system. And his wife was a nurse, and she was an advocate of using cannabis extract in the hospitals. And there's a paper online where they actually, so the oil that's referred to in the study was imported from Pakistan. There's a company called William Ransom in England, was the cannabis producer, distributor of the medical product. And when they analysed this cannabis oil that they were using in UK hospitals in the 1970s, and it says this, what they were surprised to find that in almost equal ratio to THC was THCV. And they didn't expect that. And they say that there was typically always some present, but they were surprised to see that in this oil, it was at nearly 1-to-1 ratio. Now, you've got no chance of having a flower or oil or any medicine coming through with some significant amount of a cannabinoid that's not been mentioned, or it's taken up bandwidth in production. Let's say it's lowering our THC production per meter squared is the technical accountant's analysis of what's going on with the plant difference, you know. So we don't have the total quantification as to what those changes mean. It's not just that one compound, just the fact that we've had a significant change of those sort of structures, that there will be other, let's say, other wee compounds that hang around the THCV and CBDV, which will also then be missing from the spectrum. And this does not get a mention, and it's far more accurate to say that those ratios have changed more significantly than CBD sort of across the board, sort of compared to wild type.
I'm trying to think of the implications of that now, because there's a lot of conflicting arguments that jump to history and jump back into current times, and somehow those being tied together into policy now. So in that process, it seems like a lot of these finer details and like nuances of plant science and I guess cell physiology as well have been sort of overlooked. And I'm not sure that that's something that policy and regulators can even ever hope to regulate as well. It's like that other fallacy of well, maybe not a fallacy, but that just endless pursuit of we'll regulate until there's nothing left to regulate. But at a certain point, like, you can't regulate for everything because there's so many unknowns and so many variables. It's like you'd have to have a supercomputer or AI or something to be able to, or I hope I've not planted the seed in any regulators brains anywhere, a super AI regulator. But I think there's just, at what point do regulators turn around and go, I don't actually, like, we just don't know what to do, and maybe there's another way that we could approach this without creating regulations and without trying to, I guess, synthesize some sort of response or solution that supposedly has some authority behind it. But at a certain point, I think some of these regulators just have to sort of relinquish control and sort of self-analyze and provide some level of self-awareness and self-criticism as well, that maybe we don't have all the answers and maybe there's more that we could do beyond endlessly trying to regulate and sort of go down that rabbit hole of monitoring. Well,
sure. There was just a new study out, but in the last, either today or this month it came out anyway, from analysis from Washington State, you know, shown since they've had the adult use availability or access, that there's notable reduction in both in alcohol consumption, tobacco, cigarette smoking anyway, and prescription medication, you know, of that just being the knock-on, let's say the knock-on positives for how that has implications for society. So I think, yeah, it's best going to be dealt with in just, let's say, the general cannabis space with cannabis experts and people having access, actually. And I think along those lines, I think that of the numbers that get thrown around, so for the medical space, I would think that probably a lot of them in the supply side operating are frustrated about where's those 1.4 million UK patients you promised us access to that would be coming when this was legal. They don't seem to be turning out, and there's various reasons for that. You know, if you talk to people just out of the blue, I've heard this from some of the producers, like they try to explain to someone that they're in the medical cannabis industry, and people say, oh yeah, CBD, I've tried that. No, it's not. And they say, no, it's not. And then it's hard to explain the context. And I see that every sort of interview opportunity that comes up in the media, it's always moves towards taking it away from the THC angle and moving it towards about the CBD. But THC dominant products are the majority of the products that are prescribed in the UK. So that's probably not well known, or that people know they could have access to if they've had two medications that failed and there's nothing else appropriate. You know, they can, if the GP agrees it's appropriate, specialists, they can have access to that. So yeah, I think in the bigger spaces it's developed, so that 1.4 million, however that has been counted, I would think that probably, and I had this discussion with some others, movers in the industry, that probably around 80% or so, maybe, of those folks would be happy just having access to it, whether that is, you know, whether that is through the social club type model, whether that is access to flowers where they can try one and go back and try a different one a few days later if that wasn't the one, whether that is buying a full spectrum CBD oil off the shelf or whatever it is. There's probably a big majority of those folks would be quite happy in just having access, as opposed to, oh, we want clinical trials and isolated compounds and proof before we are going to be trying it. That's not where it's at. You know, these people are doing that and they're not going to whatever is going on at the moment. So I think that's one issue, that the clinical trials and isolates and things, they all totally have their space, but I don't think I don't think they meet the majority of people who could therapeutically benefit. And then on the adult use side of the equation, I think that there's that crossover space of health, wellness, and lifestyle that's in there, as sort of a healthy lifestyle. I think that's completely underrepresented, especially in the UK perception of the cannabis space. And I think, especially as it progresses, that sort of health, wellness, lifestyle aspect of the cannabis space will be a large majority. And the perception people have of, let's say, the, you know, really hardcore nights in a dark room hitting the bong will be a bit more, let's say, you know, not the majority of where the adult use space is in appreciation, you know, of where it fits into lifestyle or not. And there's various, I'm not stereotyping, stigmatizing, whatever they are, but the perception of people don't have that impression of that sort of, you know, outgoing, healthy wellness, like from the medical community, folks that say they're struggling with brain fog. There's no way I'm going to try cannabis. Why would I take cannabis? I've got brain fog already. That was it, you know, end of discussion. So I think that's an issue. And I think the medical space will go on as it's doing, and there'll be specials, and that will improve, and the price will go down. And yeah, I hope that when they move to the full sort of adult use space, I hope that the social club model and the social considerations and the crime reduction and all that is well built into the model of whatever develops, and not only taxes, economy, and jobs, you know.
It's interesting you should mention that, Carl, because I think we probably both know pretty well, but the majority of cannabis companies and those around those companies, they're not particularly interested in CBD or in the medical space. They are more interested in that adult use. And this is sort of what's gone on in the US as well, is like that medical pathway is really being used just as a stepping stone to get adult use over the line almost, and sort of massage the populace to sort of understand cannabis a bit more. And like you mentioned there, if you say cannabis or medical cannabis or whatever, people typically go, oh yeah, CBD, I've tried that, or my grandma's bought some of that, or that's helped my auntie with her knees. It's that I don't think that's maybe addressed enough, is that most of these companies anyway, they want full adult use. And I think that maybe explains a lot of what we're seeing now, is that it's a bit slapdash at the moment, because that's where people and companies really want to get to secretly, or maybe not so secretly. But do you, at the moment, like, what sort of differences do you see between the approach that the Scottish government's taken versus the approach that the British government's taken, English government's taken down in London?
Well, a couple of different wee angles to it. Say on the hemp side, we've got some good momentum in Scotland. That's something they've been working on for some time, and and it's all part of the bigger picture. Like, the farmers were hesitant, very hesitant to grow. That's why they hadn't been growing hemp, because nobody else was, and the neighbours didn't want the neighbours thinking that they turned into hippies, so they weren't going to grow hemp first. But now that somebody else is growing hemp, they're all into it. And now that they're growing hemp and they're looking online and seeing the prices of kilos in Canada, and they're like, "Oh, looks like the same stuff. How much per kilo? We've got fields of that stuff." So, Kyle, what's going on? When can we set up the big greenhouses? You know, so that sort of momentum, let's say, has shown some has shown will for the political angle to try and get some support. We've got a new report coming out from the Scottish Hemp Association in collaboration with Safari, Scottish Environment, Farming, Agricultural, Rural Innovation, and the Rowett Institute at Aberdeen University. And this is a fellowship doctor who's written up a report on the sort of roadmap to optimising the hemp industry and production and business and farming and the whole scene, Scotland's a whole analysis and sort of future roadmap, which is great. And that all contributes to the bigger picture. So we have that, but we are limited by the Home Office, obviously, having control of the hemp licensing and all the problems with that angle. And then on the medical side, I've been part of a medical cross-party patients to increase medical access in Scotland, the Scottish parliamentary group I was involved with recently. And that was good. It felt like early days, really, of raising awareness to more folks. You know, there isn't that big rush of anything changing on the medical access or payment or anything. There's no big sort of changes coming up there. Then there's the issue of patients who've had trouble from the police, have been detained or arrested for their medication, and that doesn't even have clarity. There was a police officer present at the last meeting, and they were unable to give the definition of what a patient needed to carry to guarantee they wouldn't be arrested. You know?
There is none, is there? Basically, it's just like, even if you've got a prescription, if our police officers don't know or aren't aware, or maybe haven't, Seed Our Future have done a really good job of trying to collate some information for patients so that they can just point policemen in the right direction if they're maybe not aware of it. But it's just could you imagine, Kyle, as a new prescription owner now, you being incorrectly labeled as a criminal because you're just purely because of your cannabis use, irrespective of whether it's been medically sanctioned or not? It's that stigma's still there, and I don't know what you do to sort of overcome that. But if even the police aren't aware that these laws are changing, what hope is there for a patient, for a consumer, or for someone else to be able to navigate this as well? We're really lucky, and like, we're in and around the industry conversation and speaking with the groups and sort of seeing what's going on at a decision-making level. But I just for a consumer, what a poor performance, really, in terms of just like guidance, clarity, some education, some simple information would be great, but it doesn't seem to be.
And even if there is, it's always like followed the tagline, but it is cannabis though. It's like, what does that mean? You know, but you know.
Always hesitant, isn't it, and sort of semi nullifies.
Well, and this is actually, I give a mention, you know, of what I would say the sort of the positive role that the hemp and CBD industry has played in this unfolding picture of our society as we develop here. How, like, the few years of the CBD industry has sort of been like an exposure therapy to the nation about the word cannabis, and seeing the leaf and not just freaking out about it. Like literally people have just got sort of more comfortable with it. I remember back in 2015, 16, like, you know, artists or designers would say, are you sure it's okay to put a cannabis leaf on something? Like, I don't know if you can put that in the high street. You know, that's only, you know, just over a few years ago. Now it's everywhere, and it's in all the supermarkets on toothpaste and everything used to sell a product. So that's almost been like a sort of a exposure therapy that has been for the nation of this adjustment to accepting it back in any forum. Because like with the farmers, even I literally had called and emailed around farmers in my area to see if they would be interested in growing hemp, because there was one guy interested, and if we could get more, maybe we could get a group going and all this. Okay. So this was enough to get it underway, and it took some input, and then once it was going, it had one of the farmers on Scottish TV News last summer. We were on talking, and the next day there was like so many farmers phoning. There was all this repeating story of, you know, saw you on STV last night, and I didn't know there was hemp growing in Angus here, and you know, I've been thinking about that, but you know, of course, I didn't do it because I didn't want the neighbours to think who am I to be a trailblazing hippie in the area. So, but this is going on there. I'd like to do that, and then they start telling me about all the benefits of growing hemp. I'm like, yeah, I know that, and so it was literally like, you know, once we saw someone else that was on the TV. All right, that's what's happening. Oh, great, brilliant. Let's get into it. That's that momentum. And then here's the other cool thing that's going on from the Scottish angle with the Rowett Institute we're working closely with. So they've got 5 years more funding from the Scottish government to study hemp. They've actually been studying hemp for close to a decade on the nutritional side. And they've been waiting for farmers in Scotland to be growing hemp so they could work with and do their analysis. So they've had the idea that after being frustrated of the lack of uptake, like, you know, several years funding and study, and there's not a farm to work with the product here, they're supposed to be researching for the Scottish government. They've thought, let's just, you know, not exclude the conversation and cut them out altogether, but let's aim for the next generation. So they've came up with this leaflet. Let's see, I'm not sure if I've got one here or not. I will get one to you you can stick on your screen there. It's hemp for the future. And what they've done is it's done with bright artwork and graphics. It's deliberately targeted to children and teenagers to teach them about hemp. And it's the sort of early teens it's aiming at. And it explains, you know, that cannabis is a crop that's used for different uses, you know, fiber, nutrition, and drugs, both medicinal and recreational. Moves on. It's a carbon neutral, you know, climate positive, biodiversity promoting crop that we should be incorporating into our society. It gives all the reasons, and it's been really well received. And they've now stepped up to doing a hemp pancake cooking demonstration in all the schools in Scotland, sent out by Aberdeen University, a wee kit for them to do that. And it's been so well received. And like the conversation with the regulators is always like, well, you know, what about this and what about that, and talk to the teenagers or the children directly, and they all understand within a few seconds what it's all about, you know. And sure, teenagers like recognize the cannabis leaf. Yeah, sure. Yeah, heard about the environmental benefits. Yeah, still interested. Tell me more. Like, that's it, you know. And we can all move forward. So they've got this bright leaflet which has been like sent out to schools and things to educate them. So when that generation grows up, they can implement the right policies that we need here. So that's great.
We will have to circulate that, Kyle. Yeah, I think, well, we've been doing some harm reduction work on sort of drug education for youths. And there's a statistic that I think it's 70% of children between the ages of 18 will have been offered, or before graduation at the age of 18 will be offered drugs in some form at least once. So yeah, I mean, notwithstanding hemp, that's a great way to approach it. But I'm thinking as well, just like, yeah, early intervention almost, isn't it? And like training people before that, informing people before that stigma's almost developed, or before they sort of like, I guess the scars of prohibition sort of dissuade anyone at that early age. But at the moment, Kyle, and I'm aware as well, and I'll have to cut this bit out, I'm aware that we've only got 7 minutes again. I don't know if I don't know what's going on with Zoom, but we will do many more of these. But what I was going to say, and as we've only got 7 minutes, would you want to touch on and share with anyone or the viewers what you're working on at the moment, Kyle, and what people and where people can find you, interact with you, continue this conversation on if they've got questions of their own, and
Great.
yeah, any recommendations as well, Kyle, would be super.
Yeah. So a few things that are going on at the moment. One, I'm just getting towards final stages of to get into production of a documentary being producing about what's been developing in the hemp scene here in the UK. It's got a lot from the Scottish angle, and our new farmers have got on board. There's a lot from academics, and we've also got contributions from around the UK. I've got the director from the US Hemp Road Trip documentary going to be doing all the editing work and all this. So we're at the last stages. There's still a couple last wee sponsor things to get in for the last production there, and that's coming off. So that's nearly completion, that project. People can look up through the Scottish Hemp Association, can also find me through Holistic Highland Hemp. Something else that's going on in the space, which like you've mentioned, really pleased to this is developed, is that so the UK has got medical trials for treating long COVID with using CBD extract, and it's my specialist who did the application for the trials, and a lot of it was based on the inspiration of my story, post-viral fatigue syndrome. I was my specialist first patient in the space, and I also had to wait some time early on when it became available, because you had to have a specialist who was used to dealing with your condition. Let's say that could only specialize in their own particular areas, although it could be prescribed for any condition. There had to be someone willing to take the responsibility, let's say. So I had to wait some time, and I was a specialist first patient, and was talking a lot about, have been talking about all the different things and products, and all the years of experience in different oils and all this I had before. So this led some weight to a specialist applied to do the trial, and could say that have experience in the UK with a post-viral fatigue patient, and that's underway. So it's going to be I think literally it's at the end of July. It's like literally more or less a decade to the anniversary of all my troubles kicking off, is where this research in the UK concludes, and then there'll be some time with the data being put together. That's been done with drug science, and that's great that that's underway, and I'm really pleased that, and I hope it raises awareness, because I'm really concerned about what could be happening to some other patients who are in that situation just now and being sent to try inappropriate medications. So
yeah. Where can people follow you, Kyle? Where's the best places to sort of liaise and interact with you online?
Yeah, best place to get through to me directly is probably on LinkedIn, on the business network, and on there I'll post some industry analysis and articles and things on there, and best place to probably find me directly for messages and chats as well, say, or through the Scottish Hemp Association or Holistic Highland Hemp. But LinkedIn, for my profile on there under Kyle Esplin, that's the best place to get through to me and keep up to date with the industry stuff. My end.
Well, thank you very much, Kyle, for giving us a walk through your journey into cannabis and what it's been like, the sort of trials and tribulations. And thank you for all the hard work that you do to make sure this industry and the consumers and the patients are appropriately represented and the right questions are being asked as well. Super appreciate what you do, Kyle, and yeah, unsung hero of the cannabis industry, in my opinion. Award nomination, knighthood to come. But I'll put all of your details in the bottom, Kyle, so everyone can find you, connect with you, and link up with you on LinkedIn. But massive thank you for doing a little podcast interview with me, and we'll do another one soon, and I suspect do a longer, more drawn out current events conversation now that everyone knows who you are, what you're about, and just
great.
Now they're sort of, I guess, proverbial cat's out the bag, so to speak, in terms of what's going on at the moment. And I guess, I dare say that's it, Cal. Thanks so much. Thank you everyone for watching, and see you all soon in the next interview.
Thanks, Chris.